I got plans, but there's something I can't say. My baby slows like sweet apricots and apple cider. My baby knows who I am, everything I was supposed to be. Her name is sharper than a double-edged sword. It cuts right through my chest. And baby, oh, don't you know you're the best? And you over here, don't be afraid. And you over here, don't you wanna feel my? Don't you wanna feel my? Don't you wanna feel my grace? And my baby holds my hand overboard something's saying. My baby knows I got plans, but there's something I can't say. My baby smells like sweet apricots and apple cider. My baby knows who I am, everything I was supposed to be.
Kia ora. If anyone is wondering, our beautiful flatmate was a little bit tired today, so we, instead of having live music, just played a song from her album. So if you liked it, go on Bandcamp.
Hit that subscribe button.
Hit that subscribe. Hit that like for both the Immersive Experience live stream
And Sammy.
So kia ora everyone. Welcome to another episode of Noise from the Bench. We are very, very excited to have you all here once again, broadcast straight into our living room. So before we get into discussing all of the joys of case construction, just as usual, give us your quarantine updates. What's the vibe?
Grace and I both had a nap today, and it was like the changing of the ceremonial guard at Buckingham Palace, whereby I went and had a nap, and then she came down and was like, I'm going to have a nap. And I was like, okay, I'm getting up and I'm going to go upstairs. And it was very changing the guard. And apparently,
Tara is currently having that.
asleep.
Sammy's snoozy as well.
Everyone's tired.
Everyone has, and I am the only member of the flat, I think, who has not had a nap today. So I'm going to have a great nap as soon as the show finishes. We've also been very hard at work on Cinnamon Scroll. Motions are almost done. Tabbing is being started tomorrow, so I'm going to put everyone's details into the online thingamajig, and we've been practicing with the Zoom to make sure that once everyone's in the tournament, it goes smoothly and beautifully. And excitingly, Joe is making noodles for dinner.
So that's what I'm really hoping. After the noodles, Daniel will just be completely conked out, and then you'll be tired and go now.
Yes.
I forgot about the noodles, and now I'm really excited again.
Yeah, very excited about noodles.
The hashtag for which is hashtag send nudes, but obviously NOODS.
Yes.
So if you want to hit that up in the comments below.
Yeah, hashtag send nudes. So we have also heard your feedback. We want more interaction, as do you all. So please continue to send us comments. We're going to be endeavoring to respond to them earlier within the show, so we have more of a chat about the stuff that you guys are particularly interested in. And if you want to call in, as always, you're very, very welcome. Just flick a message to Auckland DevSoc. If you're from Australia, make sure you use the +61 version and leave out your state code. Don't be afraid of being a repeat caller. You can always comment using the page or the anonymous Google form, which will be in the comment section of this live stream. And also the feedback form. Once again, if you are keen to give us some feedback, just give us a shout on the form. As usual, a little bit of news. Cinnamon Scroll, we're still looking for some more judges and trainees. We've got a couple of speaker spots open just to make sure that the tournament has an even number of teams. This is looking to be larger than almost any NZUDC in the past, NZUDC tournament in the past like 20-ish years or something. So going well with signups. Just want to make sure we have enough judges to make the tournament as good an experience as it can be. This week we've also got the development live stream as usual on the Thursdays, and then club night on Thursday evenings. And really good practice for Cinnamon Scroll. So if you are coming, make sure you come along to our club night. It also helps you get used to the format, the Zoom format that we're going to be using for the tournament itself. You get that extra 5-minute advantage for the teams like, I can't find my prep room, that kind of stuff.
Can I give one handy tip just right now off the top of my head, completely just throwing the structure of this off the way? I think stand up when you're online debating
Yes.
and start practicing that now. So find a place in
Yeah.
your house where you can practice standing up for club night.
Kitchen's a good idea.
And then, kitchen bench, very good height.
We have a kitchen bench that we use for things.
Yes.
Yeah, very good. And then have the camera at a slightly low angle so you seem imposing and intimidating. And
Or
powerful.
like a boomer.
Yes, more like a boomer
Yeah.
with like that low angle
Don't
shot.
debate sitting down. It's a real threat.
Last two things news to mention. We got Auckland Novice Tournament coming up on the 26th of April. Registration's still open for that. So if you are a novice, want to do more debating, or if you're interested in training and judging, give us a buzz. And also the National Online Schools Debating started yesterday. Grace was one of the inaugural judges for that. And I think they're still looking for more judges just to make sure that the burden is lifted on people. So if you're interested in that, please give a message to Ailey or Sam Penno or Zach Wong, or go to the NZUDC University Debating Facebook page and indicate interest. So in terms of case construction, on Sunday we gave you a very broad discussion with some international debaters, which I thought was very, very fun. But today we're going to go a little bit more granular and talk about prepping and putting together cases that work effectively, and basically resolving all of the tensions that can exist in the prep room about how to run different cases. So we're going to have a winding discussion, flick in any comments or any messages and we'll respond to them as they come up, and obviously take any callers. But first things first, I thought we'd have a chat about that first couple of minutes at the beginning of a prep session. How do you handle them? I know there are some differing opinions on the bench.
So I loathe silent prep, and I'll tell you why. It's because I'm quite opinionated. And if I ever have a teammate who is anywhere near as similarly opinionated as I am, I find silent prep really unhelpful because I think in those few minutes it cements your thinking. So if you then go in different directions, you have had several minutes of cementing your thoughts around the debate in opposite directions. I think the dialogue should start early so you're thinking together. Like if you're going to have silent prep, I would do it after an initial discussion of where you're heading.
So I prefer to so I like silent time, the prep time, but I personally, because I'm the first speaker and I tend to be formative in the case writing, prefer it to be like at the end. So I prefer 10-15 minutes of silent prep if we got a half an hour prep at the end. And I prefer everyone to just put their reckons on the table at the start. I find it easy to get a vibe where everyone's sitting in the debate initially, and then I can either negotiate and beat down bad ideas or take on good ideas. And we can just deal with that right at the beginning.
Yeah, so I'm going to come out swinging a little bit more for a traditional style of silent prep in the first couple of minutes. But I actually like to split it up into two areas of silent prep. Because I agree definitely with some of the stuff Grace is saying. And it's not, for me, it's not necessarily getting too wedded to particular points, but basically prepping with a vision of the debate in mind, like a particular version of the comparative or a particular question that you've resolved one way that other speakers might resolve another way. That just means that when you end up having that discussion, people have entirely different ideas. You've wasted a bit of time building up 3 different versions when you don't agree on those common premises. So I like to have a little bit of silent prep, get into those common premises. And then the second stage that I like to do is I actually do like to have a bit of proper silent prep. And I think you have to be willing to give and take a lot if you do the silent prep, because there is, of course, the risk of what Grace was talking about of people getting wedded to particular ideas. But I don't think that necessarily has to be true. And I think if teams are really mindful to avoid that, I think it can be very useful for making sure that your team doesn't get caught on one track and not consider some peripheral ideas that may be very impactful and good.
We've had 2 questions done.
Already outstanding.
I really want to deal with the second one first because it gives me an opportunity to go off on a tangent.
Oh, amazing.
The second question, have you ever deployed a counter model in a big final? I have.
Yeah.
Have you?
So it really depends what you mean by counter model. I assume from the question it means the classic, I'm a negating team, here's what I stand for. And like all of the time, you need to stand for a comparative. I think my joint scroll final, where it was a regrets debate, I think in a regrets debate, you have to be very careful about what you think the world is going to look like. So we spent a lot of time constructing essentially what was a counter model rather than, because the debate was about Brown and Board of Education, which is a desegregation case in the United States. And we were just like, here's how we would have wanted desegregation to operate. So we did have to do some of that construction work, even if we weren't on the negating team.
And my ACES final, 2 years ago now, we did use a counter model. I had to not negotiate with Emily, but it was a bit of a risky move. So I had to be like, look, I really think we should go with this. Are you chill with that? And Emily was like, yep, cool, let's go. That sounds great. The context debate was around taking art and artifacts and that kind of stuff from conflict-torn regions and sending them to Western museums. My big worry in that debate on the neg was, how do we ensure access? Because I saw access to those pieces of art and artifacts as the most viable path to victory, i.e. if Indigenous groups or cultural groups in war-torn areas could have access to their art and we could secure that, that's pretty much enough to win the debate. So we counter-propped by putting an international coalition of soldiers on the ground, basically the most neocon case you can possibly imagine in the world.
Big intervention.
Which was, let's put soldiers and tanks on the ground to secure art for cultural groups at risk of cultural genocide, which obviously was probably the most neocon case you could possibly imagine. It worked at Easter's, I think, because very little time to respond to it. I don't know how much we want to go into this, but I think counter models can be extremely effective on the neg at Easter's, because if they fuck it up at second half, that's the debate gone, you win, it's over.
But it is, of course, a risk, because...
obviously a risk. You need to be confident with it, and you need to have it well designed. But I just think it's even less effective at joint scroll or off-scrolls, because there's so much more time to pick up the contradictions and tensions in that counter model.
And then, of course, at BP, setting counter models is a complicated piece. It needs to be
perhaps
within
a
the realm
fool's errand as well.
Yeah,
because you run the risk of your CO implicitly putting questions out on the table without knifing you, which I think is the correct thing. The other one here, the other question, what do you do if and Umber's indicated to me she thinks this is someone airing out dirty laundry, and I think it's probably right. What do you do if the second speaker keeps asking the same question over and over while you're trying to prep, no matter how much you try to explain the answer to her?
I know what.
I went to an Australs with that
speaker.
I know what this dirty laundry is about. It's about me. I see you, Nick. I didn't get it, and I still don't, but we won that debate and the tournament, so stop whinging.
So I think if you have a second speaker who's asking lots of questions, you should listen to them.
Oh no, this was a very stupid question.
Yeah, no, it's you've got to,
I just didn't
within
understand.
reason.
But you need to understand if you're...
No, because sometimes a speaker might spend 15 to 20 minutes asking the same question, and that doesn't really help.
No, of course. There needs to be an efficiency. And sometimes
in which case, I think the answer to this was, reassure me it will become evident after the first clash.
I think so. Do you remember the first round of Australs we went with Emily?
No.
Oh, you were asking a lot of questions then.
What was it about?
I can't exactly remember, but it got
Sounds
to a
like
point.
something I
It was
would
like
do,
a
though.
criminal justice motion, if I recall correctly. I think
Oh.
Emily and I kind of got to the point where let's do the debate.
Yeah, if it's
Anyway.
like they're confused by something, let them hear the first clash and they'll work it out
Yeah.
and win the tournament.
So it's
Sorry, Nick.
Well, I mean, I think it depends. Because I think sometimes you get tunnel vision in debating, and having one of the debaters be particularly fixated on some things could be an indication of something that the other two speakers, when they've gotten too into the
Yes.
debate, have missed.
Yeah,
It could be.
So I like to think of it a little bit of like a canary in the coal mine type situation when, and I think this is especially true for people who are case generators, in that if you spend a lot of your time building up these cases and thinking through ideas, you need to be very reliant and responsive to your teammates in picking holes in them, because they have just as much of a role in challenging your ideas and pushing your ideas and making sure that you fully think them through and fully develop all the different chains of logic, than if you're just like going hell for leather and building cases without really thinking. Well,
Yeah,
the thinking, but getting into a tunnel.
totally.
Should we tilt our light?
Yeah, it might be a bit bright.
Like just a bit like that, maybe.
Oh,
Oh,
I was going to say more toward us.
Oh, toward us. Oh yeah,
If
sure.
you've
We
got
can
any
do that.
thoughts on
Oh
it, like,
jeez. Yeah.
or away from us if that's.
Or post-production or anything.
Yeah.
Of course it's live. There's no post-production.
Send in your thoughts on our lighting.
So there is a 15-second delay. So technically at this stage, no one's heard your comment yet, Joe, but I reckon they're going to hear it about now. So I think there wasn't enough time in post-production there to really do stuff.
We're really nuking DMG's preparation today. We've got another question. So let's
Excellent.
just run
Carry
with
on.
that. How do you approach a case if you know absolutely zero about the topic?
So one thing that I was going in my beautiful structured questions for us to discuss, I was going to discuss some first steps to a debate, but I think we can be a bit specific here. And just so I think the first thing is, if you're in silent prep, make it very clear you know nothing, because you're not going to be very useful silent prepping. And if your teammate is someone who has grumpily conceded to doing silent prep, they might want to just start immediately. So communicate that you know nothing about it, so that they have that awareness that a little bit more time will need be spent upskilling you. And luckily, because of the way that teams operate, like I think it's quite rare to have something no one in your team understands. But if no one does understand, figure out the closest thing possible that you do understand to the topic and just run that case.
I'm gonna just state the obvious here. If you're sitting, you're looking at emotion, you're like, we know nothing. You probably do. You're probably just panicking. Like truly, it is probably never the truth that you literally could not come up with something.
That's true.
You're panicking. So if you're like, X acronym should be abolished. Okay. Even if you know nothing about that organization, maybe you can like ASEAN, right? You can guess that maybe that's some kind of global body within Asia, and that might even be enough. What do you start doing? Okay, we're going to abolish it. Build a generic argument. Why do you abolish international bodies?
It's finding that
'cause they're
generalization.
inefficient, or you know what I mean? And then you can prepare generic analysis. Similarly, if it's like a piece of media you don't know, or like an environmental policy in a country you don't know, or a really common one, and this has kind of gone out of favor actually in New Zealand, debating motions about like whether or not like geopolitics in the Middle East have gone out of favor. I don't know why, but we used to do a lot of debates around like, should we invade X or should we invade Y, or so once you've done one of those cases, you have generic arguments for invasion literally anywhere. So relax, stop panicking, because I guarantee you are, which is a very reasonable reaction, and go, okay, also, what are the generic arguments I could make about the very most basic, vague version of this? If you go into the room and you present that case at first, it's incredibly vague, it's incredibly basic, you have presented a case with analysis that probably applies. Luckily, the other team might know something. They will then give you details which you can use to embellish your case further down the line. If they're experts and they can give a whole bunch of structural reasons why your case is wrong that's specific, you might lose that debate. But I tell you what, we'll learn something along the way.
I'm going to be the bad guy here for a moment. Some people might not like this, but that's okay. You should try to minimize those events by reading widely about the world. And obviously you can't do much about that at the time, and you should take on both Daniel and Grace's advice for those moments. But after that, that should be a strong signal to you that you need to be reading more about the world.
Yes.
I know some debaters say, oh, well, I don't need to know stuff about the world because debating is so general anyway, and why do we have to debate about all these specific motions? Because it's boring and who cares? Well, you're wrong, because debating is about the discussion of ideas, and lots of those ideas are place set in complicated, interesting contexts. So if a debate about, I don't know, let's take the African motions that turned up at Australs last year, and you don't know, and Sudan, right? And you don't, Sydney flag, and you don't know anything about that. That is perhaps a signal that you need to broaden your reading and read more about the world.
Yeah, so I think we're probably going to have we're definitely going to be having a training episode where we discuss things like your media diet and all the things that you engage in to make sure that you're ready for.
Can I make one final point on this?
What?
Lots of people will say, oftentimes young people who don't know a lot about the world, they'll come to older people and say, what should I be doing to know more? Should I be preparing matter files? What should I be doing? The solution is simple but complicated, which is that you should be reading the news like every day.
Yeah.
And unless you actively put that into your life, not a lot will change. There's probably no matter file that you can write which will substitute for a genuine broad interest about global events.
Yeah. Podcasts I found enormously helpful.
Yeah.
And one thing I will establish here
Read
is
the
I think
BBC.
different people maybe have slightly different approaches, and so we'll give you all of our different approaches, and you've just got to find the thing that works for you. And I found podcasts really useful because I used to commute a lot in areas without internet connection, because I was like underground and had 40 minutes just like sitting on a train. So that's why that worked particularly for me.
We've just had a question on about this, which I think comes directly off this, and then I want to address another question.
Yeah.
So, hi, Joe talked about reading widely. Totally agreed. Where would be good places to start? Recommendations for blog, podcasts, literally anything. Should we get 2 from each of us?
Yeah.
Daniel, do you want to?
So I think you should just subscribe to The Economist Radio, not because I necessarily think they do the best job on the analysis front. I think so. Some of their takes are a bit poor. But what I think they're very good at is picking topics that are very wide and will probably eventually dredge up in a debating tournament or become a point that you use in a debating tournament, and they give quite good, concise background. So the amount of different ideas they manage to cram into episodes I find extremely helpful. And then I think my second bit of feedback is to read something outside of your ideological bias, not just because it presents you a different side of arguments, but also because the issues that they talk about are slightly different. So for example, I listen to a lot of Wall Street Journal stuff, and I find it some of it melts my brain. I think it's just like unimaginably dumb, but it makes me think about stuff that I otherwise wouldn't be, and does to some degree ask me to check and strengthen my own beliefs about things, and learn arguments that I otherwise wouldn't.
Similarly, you need to actively curate your social media, because that's probably where you get most of your news. So I follow left-wing people on, I follow left-wing American thinkers on Twitter.
And to clarify, I just want to clarify here, you're talking about Twitter, right? Not talking about Facebook.
Twitter is so good, but also, if you use Facebook carefully, you can also curate quite a good feed on Facebook, which is what Brindy talked about in the last episode. I like Twitter, though, because I follow, individuals as well as the news station, so I follow, constitutionalists in America, even though I think the Constitution's fucking stupid, sorry, no one come at me for that. And I follow left-wing, Washington Post and Atlantic journalists.
The Brunics, yeah.
Brunics, yeah, I love
Frightful.
the Brunics. But follow the broad range of people. And they will then bring these think pieces into your feed that you should be reading, as well as just the tweets that kind of make you aware, and try and get some global ones. So you probably want to have some news from I follow quite a lot of German news, and
I'd say 2 things. The first thing is that follow the elections when they're happening overseas, because we get a lot of election debates. So, if there's an American presidential debate on, just chuck it on in the background. Just maybe pay attention. Because they'll probably be talking about both American politics, which might be helpful for American politics motions, which turn up just a huge amount. But also they'll talk about policy as well. So if they're talking about healthcare policy, maybe that will be helpful if you have a healthcare policy debate. Second thing I'd say is if you're a Kiwi, maybe it plays slightly less in Australia because of the time difference. I've noticed that the BBC World Service is really good to chuck on making dinner. I don't do it anymore because our flat's way more crowded. I used to put it on because about 5-6 o'clock there would be an African Voices kind of program that they put on, and they would spotlight different social and political events happening in different parts of Africa, and then that would be immediately followed by the British morning news program. So back to back, you get a little bit of knowledge about what might be happening in African politics, followed by current events. And for me, I could just chuck that on in the background while I was making dinner, and it was so easy to do.
Yeah, I agree.
All the good international news companies have world pages, Bookmap, even if you want to go on Stuff, just go on Stuff World tab once a day, and you'll at least see some international news. Go on the BBC World Service. BBC has dedicated pages and social media channels for every region and country.
But can I also say the other thing? Sorry, I know we're going massively off topic now, but I assume that's fine. I assume that's fine.
This is our life.
Sorry, Amber, this is ours now. Develop a culture both within your society and your friend groups about talking about ideas, right? From quite a young age, John and I would go and have a coffee and just talk about shit that was happening in the world. Or Simon and I would go and have a coffee and talk about shit that was happening in the world. And it was cool and fun and interesting. And I don't think, unless you're going to have a social interest in these issues, I don't think you'll ever develop a wide.
All of your friends need to be nerds.
Yeah,
but actually, so I think Joe touches on a very important cultural point in that you like the off book discussions that you have with friends are often incredibly helpful. To some degree, sometimes your friends have bad reckons, and so you just need to weed them out and avoid the topics where they have consistently bad reckons. But one thing I think is actually quite useful is what I tend to do for tournaments that open sense or large squad to. I'll just write out. So it's not quite a matter file in that I won't fill this all in. I won't be adding material to it, but I'll just like dump all of the stuff that I'm seeing consistently within the news, stuff like artificial information, or just like the election the Sudanese revolution, or just like those types of things that could plausibly become topics. And then you just have a large list there. And what I think is useful then is if you are reading through it, you're much more able to see trends in stuff that you are not following that potentially is like, oh, I need to correct this. I need to, like, maybe I'm just not at all following anything about automation or about like labor or like labor economy. Then that might be something that you need to upskill in. So I think there's an active as well as passive approach to doing it. So I personally don't like full matter files. I think it's just a waste of time to write that all out. But compiling a list of things that could become a matter file is quite useful for spotting gaps in your thinking.
Yes, we've had another question I'm kind of tempted to tease out here. Anon, get Dan and Joe/Grace to argue about the worth of principal points, please.
So I think I'm going to pivot at this stage, and we're going to get around to that question. But one thing I wanted to chat about before then, and I think it links into our discussion of principal points. Sometimes you're panicking at the beginning of a prep because you don't know anything or you're not quite sure how to put your ideas together. What are some first steps? Do you have a routine for first steps you like to think about, or do you just let your brain go wild?
Can I state the obvious? Read the motion several times carefully.
Yeah.
I know this sounds so dumb, but like, let's be real, it happens not infrequently that people prep the wrong side, they miss a clause, they miss a word that changes the meaning. Make sure that you're like, someone in your team is reading that carefully and looking at why the different words are there.
Yeah.
Wording is select on purpose. There isn't a random verb or a random noun or a random comma and extra clause there for no reason. It was put there to make the different parts of the debate.
There's a quasi-legislative process that goes into selecting motions, right? Like there's a lot of intent.
But so just like legitimately, don't just like read them over. Like I do keyword analysis. Every word is there for a reason. Be like, if it's a motion about the flag in Sudan, you have to think, okay, I've got to think about flags and I've got to think about Sudan. Like it is literally to the way I prep. I go into that much detail in setting that out. Okay, so obviously you read the motion, go very into detail. Then when you're approaching taking random thoughts and putting them into a case, do you embrace a structure to that process or do you just throw it out?
I'm too old for that stuff. When I used to coach my schools teams, I used to talk about assembling a toolbox. Which is that over time you debate lots of different things and you'll see different teams and different mechanisms and ideas and ways of thinking about debates will turn up. And every time you see a team doing something like that, whether that's approach a stakeholder in an interesting way or use a mechanism which you hadn't thought about before, it's just another tool you get to put in your toolbox. And the way I think about it is that, because I'm very old now, I've accumulated quite an extensive toolbox and that I've watched a lot of debates and I've seen a lot of different teams do different things. And that's really helpful because now I'm of an age now where I almost don't have to invent a lot of new things in my cases.
No, you won't.
I get to just pull on the best tools in my toolbox that I've seen over the years. So what I'm thinking about at the start is, okay, first question, and I want everyone to go away from this thinking this, although older hacks will know this. How am I winning this debate? Not what case am I running, but how am I optimizing to convince the panel to get myself over the line? That means stakeholder identification, and that means optimizing subject certain preferences that stakeholder might have. I.e., if I care about a certain group, what does that group care most about? How do I then shape the case around those preferences? So that's the first couple of stages of my thinking. And then from there, it's grabbing my spanner, it's grabbing my hammer,
Yeah.
it's knowing
So it flows on from
accordance
there,
to those preferences of that stakeholder that I care about, what are all the different great mechs that I just get to fill in.
Mechanisms.
Yeah. What are all the different great mechs that I get to pull in order to run a full and complete case.
So if anyone has, and I know quite a few of you have, watched the Thursday development sessions, you'll know that I have quite a strict approach in the first 2 minutes, and the second part of that approach matches almost exactly what Joe's talking about. So that's what I think about, like priorities or frameworks, trying to figure out broadly what the judge should care about, and then I think your points flow very naturally from actually setting up that framework for what the judge should do. But the first thing that I tend to do, and I would actually encourage a lot of teams to do that, so I have a line down my paper when I'm doing silent prep, and I've got my priorities or framework on one side. On the other side, the first thing I do is I always think about the comparative within the debate. What exactly are the two worlds or the two options that are being compared? Because that can have quite a significant impact on how you then set up the framework. I think it's one of those foundational questions that different speakers, even within the same team, can have quite a different approach to. And it's also when you can start thinking about some of the neat tactical things you can do, like having a neg counter model, like trying to readjust your model in ways that deal with some of the other stuff that you think is likely to throw out of the debate. And I think this really helps me with panic, it helps me with two things. It helps me with panic, and it helps me with just like brain dumping, overloading, in that it makes me think about the debate in terms of how I need to win, not just in terms of what I think is interesting. So, yeah.
I just want to tease it out there because I don't think teams spend enough time thinking about how they plan on winning the debate.
I totally agree.
I end up having to give this some feedback time and time again. I mean, a lot to younger speakers, but also older speakers as well. It's like, where are you trying to go in your case? Have you designed your case with a view to win, or have you just debated?
Or is it just a list of points that you
exactly?
think? Yeah.
Exactly.
So that's the hardest thing I find in my debating, and the thing I want to work on most.
Yeah, I think people need to spend more time actively thinking about how they can win the debate. So think about how the judge is going to be assessing it. What are they going to be taking into account? And that will help you identify a stakeholder which is most important in the debate, and then curate all of your points around that.
I agree.
So let's take an example. Sorry, maybe I'm going a little bit off kilter here, but lots of people ask me, what is a good second substantive? What is a good split point, right? Now, I have a quite strong view on this, which is that a split point needs to be directly linked to how you plan on winning the debate. It cannot just be a piece of extraneous material.
Yeah, and so often people have like a mechanical split point that
Exactly.
it is just literally, I need a split point. Here's X group that the judge will be like, I found this material really interesting, but overall, I don't think
Well,
it
they
could shift my.
start talking about another stakeholder, which is irrelevant or not helpful.
Yeah.
Like, I find a good way of starting to develop a second substantive point would be to say, think about how you could improve the well-being of your relevant identified stakeholder in a different way. So if your case had primarily, let's say your case had focused on, let's say, minimum wage debate on the neg, and you talked about why employment is really good and you don't want unemployment. Perhaps instead of a second substantive focusing on another stakeholder, you talk about the cultural value of work for that stakeholder. So you're constantly going back to the group which you think is most important inside the debate, rather than just finding some other extraneous group we don't care about.
And that's normally why my extension material will be literally a part of one of the issues or clashes that I set up, because I'll have my issues that 1 + 1 + 1 equals winning the debate, and my extension should fit into one of those things. Or like in some cases, it'll add a new dimension that still helps me add up to that final outcome, but it needs to be coherent within a case rather than a.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Grace, do you have any thoughts on this?
I have so many thoughts on this. I think, and depending on the motion, there's kind of like a common umbrella. So when Joe's talking about how do you win, it's like you're going to win by making like life better for X group, or sometimes the motion is about a specific policy, and so it's arguing for the many benefits that could accrue from that policy. So what I'm trying to say is the broader part of the debate probably has an umbrella, and the umbrella is like this group is important, or that umbrella is this mechanism is important, what do we get from that, or this cultural thing is important. So depending on what the umbrella is, you can use something different for the second substantive. So if the umbrella is, oh, we're trying to help this one group, your substantive should probably be a different mechanism for that
Yeah,
group.
I agree.
If the umbrella is, we're trying to do this mechanism, what are the reasons we would do that, then that second substantive might be a different reason why that mechanism is good or important or valuable. Just like like a way to make
But
the best what you're talking
I
about.
agree.
It
Do
still
not-
has to help you win, hence the umbrella.
I agree, and I think people should explain why that material helps you win. It's something I think a lot of speakers miss.
Yeah.
I use this analogy a lot. Lots of times people treat debating like it's a television show or a video game where they're in the moment and they don't break the fourth wall. You're allowed to actively comment on the fact that it is a debate and then provide that guidance to the judge, i.e. tell the judge, if you think this point is persuasive for this reason and that it proves this thing, it is then sufficient for you to give me the debate. Actively comment on the analysis you're providing. And you can do that with your second substantive. Be like, look, this second substantive proves this, which is important because we will win the debate if we can prove X, Y, and Z. If you buy W, therefore that's enough, give us the debate.
Yeah.
Actively comment with logic on the nature of your speech.
Yeah. A little bit of a plug here. Thursday, the development session this Thursday is literally about weighing and about how to make your points have weight within a debate, which is, I think, almost exactly what Joe was speaking about. Taking the mechanisms that you articulate, fitting them into the framework of the debate, explaining how they help you win that debate. But I think we should use this as a moment to pivot onto what the question was about. And that was a discussion of principled points. And the reason why I wanted to have that discussion first is what we were discussing in terms of the second part of the thing that I do. You have the comparative and then you have the framework. For me, a lot of the time, principles will fit into that framework I'm trying to build. A principle is a justification why certain things need to be true to win the debate. It's a comment on how you win the debate in general. Because we value X thing, why do we value X thing? Why should it help you win the debate? So that's often what is meant by a principle. The other thing that could be meant by a principle is essentially a practical point that is really hard to make. Like privacy, people like to talk about the principle of privacy or the principle of free speech. They're not actually principle points. They're practical points about like getting societal value that just happen to be a little bit diffuse or very widespread or like guidelines to achieving certain practical outcomes in a messy world.
Do you want us to comment on
Yes,
that?
yeah.
Can I make I'll make a really wanky comment and then I'll make a helpful comment. The really wanky comment is that we've probably developed norms and principles as a society evolutionarily because those norms and principles have been helpful for constructing a more just and efficacious society.
Doesn't Edmund Burke say something about
Maybe,
that?
maybe, I don't know. The point is that, norms and principles don't exist for no reason. They've been developed over a long period of time because they've been helpful for our society.
Or helpful to a certain powerful group within society.
Well, sure,
Yeah.
that's fine, but they've still been helpful for somebody somewhere.
Yeah, no, I agree.
So perhaps think about that when you're running principle material. Why have we developed this principle as a society? What was that seeking to achieve?
Yes, yeah.
What change was it seeking to make? Or how was it acting as some kind of social insurance? The second point I want to make is that principle points are dumb and they don't help you win the debates.
So I strongly disagree. You need to explain so it depends what you mean by principle
Well,
points.
yeah,
as well.
okay,
So the reason why I have the two types of principle points is because I think those are the only two types of principle points that are helpful. One is a principle point that explains my framework for why I should win the debate is better than their framework because we value this thing more than we value something else. That by definition is principle clash. What do we care about? And then I think sometimes making principle points, for example, the value of the principle of free speech, you can make it with very clear impacts and harms, so that it isn't a principle point in the meaning that it doesn't have harms or outcomes to the point. It's a principled point in terms of this is how we should structure society on principle. I'm guided by this principle, but it has these outcomes that are justifiable.
I just disagree so much. So like, if you stand up and tell a judge, we stand for a principled structure of free speech in society, I don't think there's anywhere you can go. But importantly, in comparative, you can go so many places if you construct that free speech point in a practical sense.
No, I agree.
So, and
Principle points need to be made with a practical mindset to outcomes.
But Oh, well, I don't think we disagree that
No,
much.
yeah,
So
I think we agree that principal points that sit in the ether and are just like, we should do this way.
Oh, it's
For
such
no
a waste
reason.
of time. Why do you spend 3 minutes to talk about a principle,
So-
irrespective of anything?
Exactly. So you start being like, free speech is desirable because it delivers certain outcomes which are desirable.
Yes.
What are those outcomes? How are those outcomes downstream of a culture of the protection of free speech?
Yes, I agree.
Okay,
That-
fine.
so
Can I,
it's-
can I summarize where it seems we agree? You shouldn't go more than 30 seconds talking about a principle without talking about the practicality.
Yeah, you
Oh
should
god,
talk about the
30
outcomes.
seconds is too
You know?
long.
Yeah.
30
So that,
seconds
that
is
probably
too long.
answers the question of whether principal points are good. They should be in like very small compared to the practice.
But what I don't
But
want
yeah.
people to come away from this discussion with, though, is that they should avoid points that are difficult to make, like privacy points or points about free speech, because it is difficult to make those outcomes. Those outcomes can be incredibly compelling, and just because something is under the label, or we as debaters have labeled it as a principal point, doesn't mean there isn't like an incredible like wealth of outcomes there that can be mined, and so you need to be able to sift through it.
Can
So I
I
think
just-
people just like, I'm not going to talk about principles, which means they avoid things like privacy or free speech, when I think those arguments are very like rich forms of outcomes.
Can I state an obvious here? Something might be necessary for you to prove in a debate or important to prove in a debate. So in a first speech, it might be important to explain how you're going to win and the principal reason why that is the reason you should win. That doesn't mean that's the thing you have to spend the most time on.
Yeah,
Sometimes something
absolutely.
is necessary and important to do,
Absolutely.
like a principal point, but that doesn't mean it takes 6 minutes of your speech
Yes,
or even 3
yes.
minutes of your speech.
Yeah, it takes out a
Sorry,
lot
like,
of need to
we,
make the
we
point.
stand a queen when she tells the truth. Like, principal points are at their best when you are identifying why we should care about a particular stakeholder or outcome.
I agree.
You're proving the ethical, moral worth of a certain outcome. And that might be explaining why we should care more about people who come from low SES communities, because we just simply should, because those people deserve a greater shot in life or whatever. I mean, helpfully, and I think Grace has pointed this out, it takes no fucking time at all. You can stand up and be like, the most important group in this debate are low SES people, because their lives are crap and we think if we can improve them, that will be sufficient in order for us to win the debate. That takes 20 or 30 seconds. But, and I think this is where Grace is right, it's actually necessary. You actually need to do that work to explain why that's a group we should care about.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Joe.
Weighing, so there's a discussion we have about weighing, and this somewhat, and I think this is somewhat what annoys me when people say that principles don't matter. But like, they obviously deeply do matter. They're built into how we make debating, they're built into the calculation that is the outcome of a debate. And when teams ignore it, I think they have poorer, shallower debate. So it's not about not having principal points. It's about thinking, what is the point of this principal point? How does it fit into the framework I've constructed? How do I make it efficiently? And then just doing the debate like normal.
Just like, for me, it's like in prep, I would never be like, what is the principled point?
No,
Then
never.
the two practical points. That's a very, I think, and I'm just going to make juvenile way to approach it.
100%.
I just
You'd be
wanna-
like, why do we win? How are we going to
Yeah,
win? And
absolutely.
the principles integrated in that thinking, as opposed to a whole just weird.
Yeah, the framework of the debate.
Again, and we're constantly bringing that to pathway. How do we win the debate?
They'll be like, how do you win the debate and why? And
Yeah,
in
yeah.
saying that, you will have provided the principle already.
Perfect. And let's shout out to Rob Barry, who's come in here with, I think principles are often super useful as a lever in changing how to weigh other issues in debate.
Yeah.
For example, we owe a moral obligation to certain minority groups. So that means we change from maybe a utilitarian stance. Completely agree, right?
Yeah.
So for example, one of the ways I like thinking about it is that certain groups might have a backstop that they deserve to be kept in place or something like that.
So I just want to run
or
a
objective morality.
certain genre of principled points by you, and I think this is one of the points where I think, as a principle, it often operates in compelling ways, even if it may not jive with first level utilitarian outcomes. And those are points about duties that people have, and how those duties necessarily should operate them in making decisions. I know, for example, the European Debate Training Platform has an entire, I think it's like 3 of the videos that they put out are just like, you suck at principles, stop sucking at principles. Principles are actually great. And I disagree to some degree with it because I think sometimes they fall into principles sound pretty and I can make grand pronouncements about the world that isn't impacted in the way that we have, I think, very clearly articulated needs to be impacted properly.
Particularly New Zealand debating.
Yeah.
What they do, in other continents is not about.
Yes, yeah.
Not about control.
But I think, for example, I find duty points quite compelling as a way to frame a debate, even though it doesn't necessarily fit within the utilitarian calculus, but can necessarily build into the framework that you're constructing for how to judge the debate.
I think when you construct that duty, a serious question needs to be asked, which is, from where does that duty derive? Because I think people are too quick to say, you have a duty to do X. You have the classic one is like, oh, you have a duty to act morally in a good society. And it's just left there. Like, tell me in a little bit more detail why you might owe a duty to other people in your society. You could take a materialistic lens to say that, or Marxist lens to say that, well, you don't own your own wealth. That's a product of basically a random lottery and a whole bunch of other decisions that other people have made in society. If you come from a position of privilege, then your wealth is just a product of that privilege. You owe a duty in that sense. You could argue in a quasi-religious sense that, I don't know, you just have a duty to your common man for some kind of like...
Esoteric.
Well, yeah. Do you know what I mean? But I think people don't do that. They just are like, you have a duty to be good. Well, that's not enough. Give me a little bit more. From where does that duty derive? And I think
especially if it's a specific relationship dependent.
Oh, completely. And I think you can build that out.
With relative ease, actually,
I
it doesn't
completely
take that
agree.
much. It takes like an extra sentence to take that
completely.
such a more sophisticated level.
And back to what Grace was saying, you don't need to spend a lot of time on that,
No.
right? You could just say, well, no one really earns any of their wealth in society. You're just born and you happen to come from a well-educated, wealthy household, and that means you have a whole bunch of great things that happen to your life, but that's never a product of your effort. Perhaps you then owe a duty to a whole range of other people in society who weren't born into that position of privilege, XYZ, QED, your duty has been constructed, great. But you did actually do that extra effort.
Yeah, and I think here's where we potentially need to recognize both the limitations of debating as a form and the culture that is built around judging. Because very rarely will a debate turn on like deeply metaphysical questions of philosophy, and like I think it's extremely rare that that happens. What it turns on is potentially like a slightly shallower version of philosophy that basically relies on taking very complicated philosophical ideas and communicating them very simply and clearly, as Joe and Grace have talked about. And I think at that point, you can add a great degree of richness to your case, but then it needs to be won by the other stuff you do within the debate rather than just...
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But remember, in tournament formats, your speaks matter because your speaks will affect whether you break or not. So if you ever have the opportunity to make any point more sophisticated, even where that is not necessary for you to win the debate, you should do so in order to earn that half or extra point so as to ensure you don't finish fifth on speaks.
So a beautiful defense of principles from Joe. I'm glad we've reached that. That was a very fruitful discussion.
Sorry, yeah.
Shall we?
I love philosophy. I'm just gonna say it.
That was so cool.
I think that I personally hate debates where it's just like
Okay.
a bunch of
Sorry.
first year philosophers.
We have some important questions. Tell us about the socks, Joe. Grace, Rob Berry's asking if you have dogs in your socks.
Yeah. These are little llamas or alpacas.
Oh, llamas. That's pretty
That's
good.
a great question. Thank
Let's
you.
see if we have any other questions here. I don't want to handle that. Nick Robertson's keen to call, just in case Daniel doesn't check his
Sick.
phone.
Shall I give him a call?
Let's talk to Nick, eh?
I think Nick Robertson is a fantastic case builder. Just like absolutely outstanding.
Beautiful.
Hi,
Hello.
you're live on air or on social media.
Sorry, what was that?
You're live.
We're doing it live!
I will turn off my video so I don't get confused with causality. It's somewhat disorientating.
How you doing, Nick?
I am doing very well. How are all of you doing? I like the socks.
Thank you. I also like the socks. I'm doing well because I'm wearing the socks.
I'm doing well because Joe's making noodles for dinner.
Joe, how are you doing?
Yeah, I've heard about the noodles. Hopefully he puts a bit less chili in it for you than he did for him.
Yeah, it was
Yeah.
it was a lot.
Lot of chili.
So my question for this discussion is, how do you guys generally handle context and characterization points? Because I tend to consider people don't often spend enough time on them than they really should, and often later in the debate you just find yourself running into a trap where you just haven't done the basic characterization. Who are we talking about? Work
Yeah, fuck
necessary,
yeah. Fuck
and you
yeah.
basically end up losing.
Yeah, no, 100%. Can I riff off this?
Yeah.
Sorry. I just talked to Andre about this yesterday morning. So we had a debate a couple of days ago. Andre was like, hey, Joe, you said I should try to make my points a little bit more sophisticated. And by the way, I wasn't being too negative. Andre did a really good job. How can I make my points more sophisticated? So I ended up talking to Andre on the phone for half an hour yesterday. So I think one of the things that people can do a little bit more is explaining in detail the certain characteristics, motivations, and preferences of the relevant agents inside the debate. So, in debates, we're trying to use mechanisms to explain the behaviour of people doing certain things in order to achieve outcomes that we view as desirable, right? Okay. It's crucial that those mechanisms are seen as plausible by the judge. How do we make those mechanisms seem plausible? I think an effective way of doing that is characterising the behaviours and preferences of those agents separate to the debate itself in order to examine why the mechanisms are then persuasive, i.e. we talked in a little bit of detail yesterday about really basic debate around legalising drugs and running black market material, right? It's crucial that you spend a little bit of time explaining why consumers are interested in purchasing illicit product off the black market, why gangs have the motivation to sell products on the black market, before you get into the mechanisms of how those black market market mechanisms actually work. In doing that, the judges are far more likely to view your mechanisms as being persuasive.
Yeah.
So, yeah, no, I completely agree. People need to spend far more time characterising the relevant agents and stakeholders in the debate, their preferences, their behaviours. I think external to the debate mechanism or point of clash itself, so as to make your points far more persuasive when you inject the relevant motion material in.
Grace, anything to add?
Sorry.
Yeah, I've got a question,
Sorry.
Nick. Is your preferred style always to do a separate context characterization point, or are there debates where you would choose to use context throughout different mechanistic points?
I would generally lean towards always doing a context point in most forms of debate.
Mm-hmm.
There might be a handful of debates where that might not be necessarily the most sensible option. So in a debate where you've got a particularly complex model, for instance, the model will often substitute in for the context point. But no, in general, I think that if you can win a context clash in first, which is generally where I'm speaking, the rest of the debate, even after your speech is wrapped up, will just flow naturally from that.
Yeah.
So, for instance, if we look at the last round of the Easters Inn round, which DMG and Grace were both there for, I think that entire debate revolves around the question of who exactly are we talking about, what type of jobs are we talking about here. And even if you don't immediately win the clash on the first bout, making sure you've got as much material there as possible over the long run just means the debate.
I think that's
Sorry, I just so completely agree with Nick, and I think this is a product of us basically going through an identical debating experience, literally speaking at the same school.
Can I suggest you two become close friends or something?
But it's and I agree completely with Nick that if you can just win that contextual clash at the first and just win and characterize the agent successfully, everything else just becomes trivial. It just becomes so easy to prove.
Yeah, once you've built your world, it's very difficult for points that exist outside of that world to function as well.
It's just not plausible.
Yeah. So one thing I think I'll push back a little bit on the idea that you necessarily want to have a separate point. What I definitely agree with Nick about is I think first speeches need to necessarily invest more time into the context and characterization of a point, because that's obviously what the rest of the debate then flows on from, and it really helps put you on the front foot. when I did my Thursday live stream on internal point construction, I highlighted that you need to do three things. You need to do your context and characterization at the beginning of the point, then the mechanism that necessarily flows off it, and then the impact that you want to achieve on that point at the end. And so the reason why I tend not to put a characterization point as entirely separate to other points is because normally you're going to be wanting to prove several things within a debate that may not rest on the same assumptions at the beginning. So even if in one point about like a particular stakeholder, you say, adjudicator, two things you need to know for this point to operate. Point one of characterization, point two of context, and then here's how the mechanisms flow on from that. That might necessarily be distinct from point to point on what you want to prove. Where I think what I really like about Nick's approach, though, is I think he's very good at building that world in a very compelling and cohesive way within one point. And what I'd encourage people to learn from that particular approach is particularly around introductions. I think the goal of an introduction for a first speaker should often be, how do I take the various bits of context and characterization that are necessary to each of my individual points, and you'll walk through them in a more clean, detailed way when you actually get to each of those points and the mechanism to throw onto them. How do I build it into a world where it's hard to disentangle these ideas? It's hard for them to pick it apart and make it weaker. And very good introductions, I think, paint that picture of a characterization, basically a picture of a world very effectively.
Are we going to ask Nick a
Yeah.
question, or should we?
Sorry, Nick, one thing I'll say is one of the reasons why I think you're quite good at running that first one characterization point is because often I've noticed in debates that I have won and lost against you is that you choose quite narrow cases and then you're like, I need to win this case. And so if you've only got really like one impact that wins you the debate, you can necessarily be like, my 3 points are context, mechanism, and impact. And I think that works particularly well in, for example, Easters. And I think it works less well for Australs, and I think it works even less well for BP. So necessarily there needs to be a shift of approach. And when I spoke first at Easters, I think I adopted a very similar approach to how you set out necessarily your interpoint structure, not your intrapoint structure.
Oh, I would completely agree. I probably wouldn't do a context point in a BP debate. Because it's like not what you will place on, and what you'll place on is significantly much more your impact.
Unless it's an extension. I think an extension, often in my extension points, I'll have like a context point. How am I going? For example, the Sydney Mini semi-final, where our whole extension was premised on the context of the Saudi Aramco like IPO that was happening. Like half my speech was a characterization.
Can I oh, sorry, next you go.
But I think that's about having limited category and BP extension. I just think that BP debating is just so different from
It's very different,
regular two-team debating.
Can I just? I don't know if we might hang up on that because we can talk about BP.
Yeah.
Is that? No.
Thank you very much.
Can we leave you?
Yep.
Thanks, mate.
Bye,
See
Nick.
you guys.
If you want good tips on case building, go watch one of Nick's best speeches from the last year.
I want to push back a little bit on this BP thing because you had this.
Which BP thing?
Well, so DMG was like, oh, you shouldn't take this narrow approach in BP. Well, except of course for extensions, because in extensions you want to successfully characterize a narrow view of the debate in order to be successful.
Yeah.
I want to push back a little bit on that because I think teams should be doing that at the opening clash.
Okay, interesting.
Because I think teams should think a little bit more about providing an extension at OG or OO, which is to say you need to continue to be relevant after the end of the closing clash, which means you need to do just, from a good closing team, you'll see them say, the most important material in this debate is actually about X. And then we're going to go about proving X. Well, hold on a minute. You have a similar burden at the opening clash to prove that your material is incredibly important at the opening clash, such that you don't fall out at the closing clash. You should be putting just as much effort in at the opening clash to go through the same rigmarole and the same journey to prove that your material is just as important. So I'm going to push back there a little bit. I think people should be taking the same narrow approach to say, hey, hold on, this entire debate is actually about this. I mean, do that right from OG. Go understand, this debate is about this for these reasons. And narrow everything up.
So where I'd push back on Joe there is I think that's very true, but I think that comes in the impacting section. I think teams need to have an incredibly clear, how do we keep this debate, this invitation relevant within the debate? And I think the reason why I wouldn't run a single contextual point at the beginning is because I do think you need to prove slightly like larger harms and more extensive stuff in your first speech. So I like to integrate my context within stuff. And then I think it also depends on your dynamic within a team. So for example, when Zach and I went to Worlds, he would have a very contextually heavy first speech. So just like a first speech in Australs, where he'd have all of his different impacts, and then he'd build lots of worlds around in that opening speech, and then I would approach it in a much more scorched earth approach as a second speaker. So make sure that I've closed off all the bits that he has, and then just burn material, go through like a huge range of other stuff, which I think often left closing teams a little bit.
Absolutely, which I think is that first second role distinction.
Exactly,
Yeah,
and no, but one thing that I think was very good about what Joe said is you need to have that impacting mind from a first speech. If you just drop context without explaining why the mechanisms and impacts you built are relevant to the debate, you just become a really good springboard for a closing team to be like, they wanted to chat about the context of this debate. I'm going to prove 4 incredibly important impacts, and I'm going to walk through them and tell you why they're important in the debate, rather than just telling you a story.
I think we need to do a whole different episode in BP because the dynamics in BP are just so
very fun,
radically different to debating in a whole lot of quite key ways.
Can I want to make a brief comment here for the South Island debaters watching this. I think impacting is quite a North Island term.
Interesting.
And I don't think we use impacting as a term quite a lot.
What was used?
So
weighing, or
I don't even like weighing.
Okay.
I want teams to think about relevance.
Yeah.
Impacting, I think people just go back to, and the outcome of this mechanism is really, really large. It's a really, really bad thing. What we're actually trying to prove is why a stakeholder, a certain category of individual, is really, really relevant and really, really important. And I think a lot of the time, I think South Islanders miss this just because there's a difference in cultural language. Is when we're talking about impacting, we're not talking about running that material at the end of a mechanism so much as we are talking about why a group or a stakeholder is really, really important, relevant. Is that fair?
Yes. When you're starting to try and do this, when you think that as a speaker, you're at a stage where you've got sort of analysis that is improving, but you are struggling with weighing, I think it's important to remember what I said earlier. The same as goes for inserting principles. You can do that weighing or that impacting or that making relevant with actually very little time. Sometimes it's as simple as an extra sentence in a speech would have made a harm or a benefit much more powerful or much more emotional or much more just convincing of a judge. It doesn't have to be a lot of time to do these things to make it more sophisticated. So don't panic, don't start speaking more quickly, don't start freaking out and inserting whole points where you try and do this as a weird extra tag on. It's icing as the cake and it can take very little time.
Yeah. So I just want to add,
which also means that you should do it because for so little effort you get the rewards of being seen as much more sophisticated.
So one thing, and just to cap off this discussion, I'm going to start with an apology just for being a little bit imprecise in my language. Often I use terms like impacting and weighting separately. And if you listen to the Thursday live stream this way, and I explained this in a previous point we did about session we did about how you construct points, how you impact and weigh the points at the end. What Joe says about relevance, I think that impacting and weighing are 2 different components of relevance. And I think making sure that sometimes we use those points interchangeably, but I think they articulate different things. When I try and weigh points, when I try and explain why a point is relevant, I impact the point and I weigh the point. What I mean by impacting a point is exactly what Joe said. You need to quantify how big the harm is, how many people it expends to, just so that another team, especially Australian teams do this all the time, you give a great point and then they just cut the impact. It's only a tiny group of people. You haven't done enough work to explain why the harm is particularly severe. And it's just really frustrating. So as Grace said, very easy to do. Just make sure you can't be outflanked. And then the weighing aspect of it is then fitting it into the rest of the debate, comparing it against other points, explaining how it fits into that impact. So the stuff that Joe is talking about with relevance, I try and approach it in a 2-part approach, where I pick the impact and I approach the weighing, and then that builds into broader relevance of a point.
We stand clarity of analysis.
We do stand
clarity
clarity
of
analysis.
I think that was great.
And that means
Yeah,
in terms of number of people affected, giving like mean, median, mode, that you predicted group size.
So if I am
No,
Grace
don't do
in a
that.
debate about a very,
Don't do
very topic she knows a lot about, maybe.
No, in terms of like like the size of the group. You can quantify like the group. You can also quantify like the degree of impact on that group. So it could be
vulnerability
like,
of the group.
so sometimes your group might be like a really large group in the population, but the effect's quite small. But you're like, well, it's aggregate, so it's like overall broad effect. So it's like you can quantify lots of different things to impact.
So I would love you two to add to the workshop we're doing on this Thursday, because literally I have a list of different ways that a point can be impacted, covering a lot of that stuff, like how wide the group is, how severe it is, like whether the group's particularly vulnerable, go through all of those things, just in terms of actually impacting and weighing out those points effectively.
I'm only contracted for 2 podcasts a week, so we'll have to negotiate this off camera.
Neat.
We've gone for an hour.
Yeah, gone for an hour already?
Do you have any questions? I think there must be questions.
Let's check the number.
Some questions.
And
We did
sorry if
get
this has been a overly
Kayla.
debating. No, I think this has been quite a theoretical is the wrong word, but I think it's been probably a heavier debating improvement. We will get back to the banter and general chats in many other podcasts.
Yeah.
I think this was a good.
My focus group of people are really enjoying the episode so far.
Nice.
So
We didn't really get into like point construction, but I wonder
Yeah.
if maybe you watch like Daniel's live streams for that kind of thing.
I'd like to apologise to Auckland DevSoc for destroying the pre-planned topic and just going off on about
Oh,
these
shit.
tangents.
Well, I reckon we
Yeah,
could
yeah.
always have a second
Let's see
episode
what
about
else- what
this.
else have we-
I'm just gonna. I think we've discussed a lot of this. I think okay. So I think we're going to have a separate episode all about managing case conflict within a team dynamic, focusing on how you practically take the ideas we're talking about and do it. The last thing I want to finish on, and also like prep roles for different speakers, how you approach all that type of stuff. The last thing I really want to chat about is the value of New Zealand Easters or Officers' Cup, and why it is so good for teaching case construction.
Isn't
God,
it-
I love.
Isn't it
great,
good?
isn't
Isn't it good? It's the training ground, right? You've got to bang it out in minutes, right? I mean, it was great practice. Like Emily and I had a good Sydney mini run one year, and I swear Easters was such good training for us because we got into a real mode where I could be like, Emily, I want you to finish this point for me. Give me 4 mechanisms on a piece of paper, and we just like bang it out. And it's just so regimented. Like we are never getting rid of that style. I will like.
And to be fair,
war
one of the
against
things, one of the
getting rid
reasons
of
why I
styles.
oppose getting rid of the old joint scroll is that I think having that
Which is a bad opinion, by the way.
broadness. My
Oh
point, bad.
no, sorry, I'm with Daniel.
Yes.
The old
Old
joint
joint
was
sucks
fantastic. No, the
balls.
old joint was so
So
good.
good.
It was so good because, and I tell you why, and it's because of a hyper-personalized reason. It's because I think debating is about discussion of ideas, and I think that matters more than anything else.
I just like prepping more than everyone. And winning.
Well, I think it's about talking about ideas, and Old Joint was a fantastic opportunity to talk about lots of complicated different ideas in different contexts, where with limited prep, you just simply can't.
I love Officers' Cup. I feel like
it's so good.
I don't know. It's like if debating was like martial arts, it's like the different tournaments, are like
Yeah.
very, very different styles of combat. But you need quite different
And then
skills.
debating, BP's like MMA or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, like
It's weird.
Officers' Cup is just fun because you get to do the different types of debating are really cool. And it's like if you froth debating, you love getting to use different sets of muscles. Like Officers is like you could lose the debate in the first 2 minutes of your prep if you like don't get the
I know,
motion.
it's just
like
great.
it's so good. It's like
hot.
this rapid,
Yeah, I know.
like high stakes, very fast cut and thrust.
For
Like,
my,
it's like a sprint, and then like Australs is like a marathon, and BP is like artistic gymnastics, where it's about the creativity. Like
taking a big
so
fucking
cool.
handful of cocaine and shoving it on your monkey brain.
yes, yes, and that's why I think it's
Very good.
really we're so lucky in the New Zealand circuit that we do in a year.
Other circuits should adopt it.
Oh,
We do Officers Cup, we
Yeah,
do Australs,
it's
we
just
do
great.
Joint, which takes up as an Australs now with our own like New Zealand flavour. We do the BP
POIs.
circuit. A lot of other circuits do like mostly just BP or mostly just one style. We get to
Or
do
that's
all
the
of them.
Americans.
And they win,
Things-
but like we have lots of fun.
Also, like New Zealand per
Per
number of
capita.
no, per
capita, yeah.
campuses, per number of campuses, like we do all right.
I
we
just
do very
like,
just
on the martial
tournaments.
on the martial arts analogy, I think we should do like a Joe Rogan style color commentary, like of MMA, but for debating. I think it'd be really fun.
Well,
like, how
so-
good would it be if we did like your classic like weigh-in where you go and like talk to the speakers and like they rough each other up a bit and you get a bit of a fight and then like Joe Rogan's like pushing them apart and shit and like I don't know. I think it'd be
Like,
fantastic.
I love
Isn't Joe
Opposites
Rogan
Cup, and I
So
love every
that's
style
No
we do.
idea.
I love every style we do. I love all my children equally.
So
like,
all joint scroll.
so good.
Sad.
Yeah, old joint scroll sucks shit.
Okay, so I'm gonna
Sorry, I shouldn't
break.
say that, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. That was vulgar language. I apologize.
I'm gonna
I don't like
break
old joint
these two
scroll.
up.
I'm very lazy.
We are going to have another case construction episode because obviously we still have lots of tools and we didn't even get a chance to share our stories about things. One thing I would say is I brought up the last cinnamon scroll of the batch we made on Sunday because we have devoured them. We are still looking for some judges, trainees, and we have a couple more speaker slots. So if you are interested,
which you should be.
which you should be,
It's fun.
it'll be so much fun. Yeah, thank you. This was a excellent discussion. Thank you for calling in, Nick. Yeah, we had so much fun. Okay, I
And
think
if you've got fun novelty socks, send us photos.
yeah, signing off.
See you.